Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for March 5th, 2021. I'm Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force. We've got, I think, a relatively brief agenda, but how much time we spend on it is really up to us. We did have meeting minutes to approve, but we're actually going to hold those minutes. We need to make some updates to them, and we will approve those minutes at our next meeting. So just hold off on that. Really, the primary agenda item is to have a discussion on the presentation that we delivered to the select board on Tuesday, and just get your thoughts and feedback, and sort of think about how, if we feel we need to make adjustments, reframing, and just sort of talk it through a little bit. I think that could be productive for us as we move forward, with the understanding that there is a public hearing that's going to take place on our work and that of the Reform Committee as well on March 16th. And then a vote is expected of the Select Board on March 30th. So this is a sort of throughout this month is just sort of being ready and prepared to answer questions that may come from, they may come during those meetings, but also individually from members of the Select Board or others, including those in elected office, as well as just members of the public that may have interest in questions in our work. So just preparing for that. Before we get into that discussion, is there any other sort of announcements or anything like that relative to anything that's not about Tuesday's presentation?
I have a question about the vote, Raul.
Yes.
Is it to accept the reports? Is it to accept certain parts of the report? Like in other words, like if a select board member didn't like one of the recommendations from one of the subcommittees, is that enough to sort of say, and then could conjure 3 votes, right? Is that enough to say they wouldn't accept the report? Like I'm just unclear how this works.
Yeah, maybe actually I've got some thoughts on this, but I've been on the board for just a couple years. Mel, I'm wondering if you can help walk us through what some of the permutations might be, what board votes on this might look like, based on past experience.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that, you need a majority of votes, 3 votes out of the 5 members. And, you can slice and dice it just about any way you want in order to get those votes. But, you have to get the consensus of the board about, you get to try different motions and try to different package things. Sometimes that's a way of doing it. And I do see some commonalities between the 2 committees. I mean, clearly there's a lot of overlap and some areas where I think there are, if not competing, there's certain, there are similar recommendations in terms of the issue in particular. And so, I think we have to think about the ways to package those, but ultimately, if the majority of the board wants to do something, there's a way to do it. And eventually, my experience is that will always come out. And, if one motion doesn't work to do that, then there's an effort to do something different. So that's, I thought a little bit about this. We have an agenda planning session every week, and that's my initial thought is to have the board take up different areas of the issue that are overlapping and sort of tease it out that way. That's my thought. There's no real science or requirements to this. It's politics. It's working through policy proposals.
Yeah. Thanks, Mel. And it may be that there are certain elements that I think, for instance, we both the Reform Committee and our task force are contemplating some civilian either advisory or oversight body, and then sort of seeing whether or not what we in the details what something like that might look like. So it seems you've got 2 different bodies that are saying we need to have some other group that's helping us make decisions about how to move forward. I think that there's a lot of room for us to share our ideas and to build on frankly, what I think there's a lot of good in what the reform committee came up with relative to the to their advisory body. I'd like to see it have a little bit more teeth, and maybe that's something that we can have conversations about. Is how we sort of meet in the middle a little bit there.
One other concept that happens a lot with these situations is you try to find, the low-hanging fruit, the parts of the recommendations that are not controversial or can be put together, and that's always one way to sort of get some momentum and begin to do that. So I don't know, I know the reform committee has a lot of smaller things about, I don't know, parts of the web page that need to be improved and smaller items, and maybe some of those will get taken up. It's a way to start the momentum for sometimes. We had a similar situation last year where the Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee put together a very extensive report, very dense, a lot of recommendations. And I'll be honest with you, I think the board had a hard time kind of getting through it because it was so detailed. It wasn't as controversial, and this issue has a lot more public controversy about it. So it's not going to be easy. It's politics can be messy, and I see this one setting up to be a little messy, but I do think that there's a way to approach it with these common things. For example, the accountability proposals that you talked about.
Thanks, Bill. Almas?
So I just have a question. Like, I can see that there are things that are overlapping and they're closer together that would go more easily. But then I'm thinking of things like, so for example, the mental health, our vulnerable people and the mental health substance use committee for the reform committee, and is there like possibility of like negotiation or something? I'm not sure how it works, because for example, like we're saying we want to go with cahoots. They're saying they want more social workers to go with the police force, but is there some sort of way to wed the two so that it's like a cahoots? Like, I'm just wondering, like, it's a cahoots model as social workers or, other types of folks that would be non-police, and then, but there's also the police backup. Like, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but it's like, is there some way to wed the two so and negotiate, or does it just like not get voted on? So I'm trying to think about that.
It's a good question. I mean, one of the challenges is that that we've got to balance our budget every year, right? And so we have a fixed amount of dollars, and so there are certain things that we're asking for that cost money, and there are certain things that the reform committee is asking for that cost money. And it may be, I mean, for instance, one might say, the best possible thing to do is to make sure that a social worker sits in the car with a police officer for every single call. I don't know that that's practical or something that we can do affordably, right? And so we've got to also deal with the real life limitations of our budget, right? And so it may be that we, enhancing the police department's ability to better handle calls relative to mental health or other issues is a really good idea, and that doing a cahoots model is also a really good idea. And then we've also got to figure out all of the other ideas that both reform and reimagining groups have that also cost money, and figuring out what is actually possible to do in the short term and in the longer term. So I think that so yes, I think there's room for us to have conversations either through the board or in other ways to try to get us a little bit, closer together. But at some points there may be a need to sort of make a decision about what direction we want to go in. But those are just some of my preliminary thoughts. I see some other hands. And Mel, jump in anytime, if there's something else that, or if you think I'm saying something wrong, please correct me, especially. Mike?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, the place to start is to, as Mel said, there are some places where there's considerable overlap and some places where there's at least some overlap. Start with those. And you have to have a conversation, really, with members of the select board. It might make sense to have a representative group from each of the two committees, from the task force and the reform committee, to sit down with the select board or someone that select board designates to try and focus on the easier things. The second thing I would say, and that will get things started, I think. The second thing is it's a mistake to think that the report is going to be accepted, any report is going to be accepted and implemented in a single piece and in a single fiscal year. Excuse me. The budget has basically been created for the year that starts in July, and so anything that we do has to be within the frame of that budget as a practical matter. I think it would be very important to have a group appointed by the select board that looks at merging these two sets of recommendations on an ongoing basis. So start now, start thinking about FY23 and what we could be doing then. Take a more detailed look at bringing the Cahoots program into Brookline or some similar alternative. There's a great deal of detail, then the devil is always in the details, a great deal of detail that needs to be worked out to put this stuff into effect, even if everybody absolutely agreed. So I would think that one of the things we'd want out of this is a continuing program to implement this.
Thanks, Mike. Chichi?
So I think Mike sort of answered one of my questions. My first question is just simply to confirm the board on the 30th is not voting to bless the reports. That's, I think that was Malcolm's original question. It'd actually be on one or more of the proposals. And I think what Mike is saying makes sense. I mean, these are very significant proposals, and it doesn't seem like you would vote on all of them all at once at one select board meeting. That, you know, you would maybe, it would be a process of looking at each of the proposals that would take more than just one meeting. So I just wanted to confirm all that.
Yeah, this is something that happened with the BFAC report. I don't think we got all that done in one meeting or even two. I don't think, right? Is that right, Mel?
I think it took meetings to figure out, how we're even going to approach it. Literally, this is this one has, all the added, public input process and on Zoom and all that stuff. So it's not going to be a meeting. It's going to be many meetings.
Yeah. The BFAC isn't done yet. The BFAC implementations haven't been fully implemented yet.
I've heard, Mike. Yeah.
You may want to explain what BFAC is to some of the other
It was the big committee last year at this time that was dealing with financial. It was the Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee. It was kind of this blue ribbon committee on finances. And they had a lot of recommendations, and it was very dense, a lot of financial, budgetary, technical issues. And I'm just using it as an example of one that the board took up last year and really had a hard time kind of figuring out how to attack such a complicated set of recommendations. And I think with this one, it's not so much the complication, although some of them are complicated. It's the political, the public input and passion about them. That will be, we've already seen it. So.
Right. Let me actually bring Ann in here and then Eitan.
So just a quick suggestion is that the vote for the 30th could be that the select board accept the report, so they receive them. And then you have a plan that is put forward for a review of the recommendations in each of the major subject areas.
Right. Well, I'm really hoping that's something that we can do this month, though. I think there's they've received our report. The board has. I think I'd love to see if I think there are things that we can get past this month, in the month of March, that will improve the state of affairs right now. And there are other things that may take longer to figure out. I think we just have to start talking to each other and figure out what those things are. And I don't mean just us talking to each other, but Bernard and I getting together and maybe what Mike said, small conference committees getting together to sort of talk through some of the areas of overlap and see if there are things we can get done this month. I really hope so. Eitan?
Yeah, following up on that, and I don't really want to butt into the select board procedures about which I know nothing, but I just wanted to advocate that my sense from seeing all this, Raul, is that if you and Mr. Green sat down and came to the select board with a set of proposals you both agreed upon, that would go a long way very quickly because you both know more about the issues now than it seems like anyone else. And so I would really, if the two of you just talking offline can get 80% there and reach agreement on and compromise across various sets of things together, my sense is that would be a big win for the community. And if there are a few items that presenting the select board with, a sort of a set of compromised views that have already been hashed out between the two of you.
Okay, thanks, Eitan. Kristen? Kristen, we've got you off camera, maybe by design, but you're also on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Off camera by design, yes. I think my comments are similar to some of the things I think I hear from Eitan, in that there's how we go forward based on what we can negotiate, and it's how we go forward based on what the policies and procedures within the town already are. So for school resource officers, for example, I think we have different perspectives on the path forward around that. And the legislation from the Baker administration has changed. So there is a direction forward that we have to take that needs to reconcile some of the now ambiguity that exists with the change in legislation. And I suspect that given that ambiguity, there's an inclination to, we'll kind of just do what we've always been doing. And I think that's among those things that needs to be reconciled and that not be the pattern forward in this particular case. And so if Eitan says that there is a way for you and Bernard to facilitate coming together to figure out what we would do about SROs, that would be helpful. But not having a compromise suggests that there is a default plan for going forward that I think is going to be unacceptable to a number of people.
Right. Got it. Thank you. All right. Well, let's get into our conversation about Tuesday night and see, we can talk more around strategy moving forward, either as part of that conversation or after that conversation. But I think this is all very helpful, and getting direction from you all on how we might be able to move forward is really important. So let's talk about Tuesday night. I'll just open by saying a couple things. One, I thought you all we all delivered a compelling presentation. I've gotten many messages from people who, frankly, have not been to any of our meetings or public hearings or anything, but we're tuning in for the first time to this work, and very positive messages about the presentation and just sort of the arguments that were laid out there. So I think that's really good news, and I think the more that people can see that presentation, it's already up, by the way. I don't know if it was up that night, thank you, Big, or by the next day, but I saw it the next day already up on the Big channel. It might have been up sooner than that. So thanks again to Brookline Interactive Group for continuing to hold it down for public access to all of the things that we do as a town. It was a very difficult setup because you had about an hour-long presentation from the Reform Committee, a very brief break with a couple of maybe questions, and then an hour-long presentation from us. And at that point, we're at about, I think, 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And then, of course, not a lot of time for the board to digest what it is that what they heard. Plus, there's just so much of it. I mean, just the vast amount of recommendations from both the Reform Committee and the Task Force. I think it's natural that board members want to sit with it, read the report. If not the executive summary, our 10 pages, and I don't know how long the executive summary is for the Reform Group, but that executive summary too. And then I think come back with more substantive questions. I'll say I think that that I was disappointed that there wasn't enough time for Nancy Heller and Heather Hamilton to dig in with their questions, because frankly, those are two of the board members that haven't been as presently engaged with this work as the other three board members. And so I really would, in future meetings, I really want to make sure that we have time for them to ask the questions that they have, because frankly, they haven't been, they just haven't been here and they haven't seen the work. And so they may have many more questions than others do. And so, I really lament the fact that we didn't have enough time for them. And sort of my own role in being animated in sort of responding to, to some of the, anyway, I won't characterize it, but some of the other questions that were asked. And so, I want to make sure as part of my role that that I as much as possible, leave the door open and make myself available to answer their questions about our work, because I think that they probably have smart questions to ask, and I think they need the time to sort of digest this and then ask them. So those are my thoughts, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Anything that we can learn from Tuesday night, and anything we should be thinking about going forward as we sort of continue to be the group of people individually and collectively that are answering questions about and otherwise sort of defending these recommendations, and also working to find some common ground with the other recommendations that we've seen. Mike.
There were two things that Jonathan Skoyak commented on, and I think we can respond to both of them, and that it's important to do that. One is he was, I think it was John, who was talked about survey data, and the other, and looking at the details of the survey data, and the other was his questioning of some of the traffic data that we had extracted and put into the appendix. And in both cases, we have backup beyond what was in the report. And of course, there's a limit to how much you can put in the report. But I think it's important to make everything that we possibly can available, at least electronically, so that we can say, well, we have these voluminous reports of traffic stops from the police department, and here they are. And you take a look at them and tell us what you think they mean. That to me was a really important lesson in terms of blunting the attempt to find a way through the conclusions of the jury.
I did actually on that, Chief O'Leary, are you with us? I see you there. I did get a follow-up request from someone with, make sure you're there. There you go. For more information to Mike's point about traffic stop data, even more that was included in our report. And essentially this is from a town meeting member that was asking, and I'm not expecting you to respond to this right now, but is looking for, let me just look at it right now. I'll send this to you. But very specific data around like vehicle make, model, year, the offense, the race of the driver, all of these other like individual traffic stop data, obviously de-identified with no one's name on them. Is that something that is possible to get and for us to share?
I think it's going to be a tremendous amount of work, and it's not a cop out. I just want to let you know that make, model, and everything, all those citations are entered by hand.
Right.
And we just take certain amount of information off the citations to put in there. So I don't think there's staff there to do it, at least not in a timely manner.
Is there a spreadsheet? Maybe this is part of what the reform committee's recommendation, because I saw that they were talking about some some better program to track traffic stops. Is this part of their recommendation? Is there no spreadsheet that just has this all dumped somewhere?
The spreadsheets are what you saw. It's how they get made up based on what the department wants and the requests that are made. I think going over the charges that you mentioned that town meeting member wanted, we did do it for the arrests, and you should have those statistics for 18 and 19. And they show what the charges were based on the arrest. So those are done. The other stuff is, I could look at it, but I tell you right now that we're relying on, the department's relying on hand entered information, and then they pull it out based on their computer program. I think what the reform committee is asking for is a better way to automate things, that it's not going to rely on staff to input all the data.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Seems like a good idea. Yeah.
I think it is, because I think that traffic stops and the data that can be provided is critical to the town and to the department. And so I think it's a good idea.
Great. What I'll do is I'll forward that that email to you, and if there's some pieces of it that you can make work in terms of getting a response to him, that'd be great. And if not, just you can be clear about that too.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Tim. I want to make sure that we do. Mike brought up sort of the question about the survey that came up very early in the questioning on Tuesday night. I want to make sure that we give Eitan a chance to respond to that. But I see Chi-Chi's got your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to also follow up on the traffic data issue. For the report, I only put selected information that Chief O'Leary gave us, because to put all of the data would have been too voluminous. So there is a set of data that Chief O'Leary supplied that's not in the appendix that you could, it probably is not responsive to the town meeting member, but at least it's the additional data that Chief O'Leary provided. The other thing I wanted to flag or is that one of the criticisms was looking at the data that was provided in Appendix K, but actually the most important piece of data that we had flagged came from the year-end report, which I didn't put in the appendix because, it's out there, it's public, it's posted already. We could do that just to be responsive. It's hyperlinked in the report.
Yeah.
But the key piece of information is from the year-end report.
Right. Yeah, I think having stuff hyperlinked in there is fine. I'd love it if we could find a way to sort of take the data that we got from the chief and have that on Google Docs and then hyperlink it. We can add that, I think. Devin, is there any issue with that? We can add that to one of the appendices and include an additional link, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So I think we should do that. And that way, if folks want to dig deeper into the data, they should have access to do that. So if you can, Chi-Chi, if you still have a way to find that, we've gotten so many emails at this point. If you've got a way to find that, if you want to sort of get that over to me and Devin, we can figure it out.
Okay, I will try to find it and upload it somewhere and just give you a Google Doc link that you could add to the end of Appendix K or somewhere in the report.
Right, and then we can just give a little description about what it is. That's perfect. Yeah, and the other piece around the data is and I hope I think things were like somewhat muddled in the conversation that followed the presentation, and I was sort of like stepping back after Tuesday night and sort of thinking about it, and when you have lots of data, yes, it's undeniable that depending on where you're looking, you're going to see potentially different patterns, and patterns might show up here that aren't necessarily present there. And I was sort of thinking about it, and it's the way that I was sort of conceptualizing this in my mind was me saying, there's a dead body here, and someone facing this way and saying, I don't see a dead body. And me saying, well, if you just looked over here, you'd see the dead body, but for some reason you're looking over there, not where I'm telling you to see the dead body, and it's right here. And frankly, I'm surprised you can't smell it, even if you can't see it, because it's so obviously there. And so I think there we need to have, it seems, more conversations about data, because we have so much relative to the traffic enforcement, but also the other pieces from that big community-wide survey, and to maybe talk with folks a little bit more about data and how it works, and to better understand why based on this maybe big mountain of data that might show a number of different things, why we focused in on certain areas and what we think that means. I'd love for us to talk more about that with not just board members, but members of the public too. Yeah. Kristen.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to follow anything that started with the words dead body. So I will make my comment quick. I think I would like for us not to lose sight of this thread around data, because I think it has some implications for our SRO discussions as well. Part of what we were thinking about together and advocating for is the degree to which we have the data to tell us which students are brought in contact with officers, how frequently, and to what ends. And we didn't have the ability to have the data available to us to be able to do program effectiveness types of decisions. And so it feels to me like if we're going to think through this thread of data as it relates to traffic stops, then I think we need to make sure that it is consistent across all the places where we need the data to support the advocacy for racial justice outcomes. If we don't comprehensively make sure that we have the data to validate that racial justice is being served or is being upheld, then I don't think that we will have done our responsibilities as far as convening as this task force.
Yeah. I think there's a lot there, and that was one of the great challenges we had. I know in SRO, but also in the walk and talk is for programs that don't have any set measurable outcomes or planned program analysis, is to how do you properly evaluate a program that hasn't been evaluated in 30 years in the case of the walk and talk program, or a program that doesn't have any particular metrics through which to evaluate it in with respect to the SRO program. Very difficult to do that. Okay. Eitan, do you want to jump in here and talk about that the question in question? Because I think I was even a little confused in the moment as to I think what was being alleged, and I have more clarity now on that question. But you're the expert, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Sure, happy to do it. I think we're talking about a relatively small point from my perspective, but if it's a big point for Mr. Von Skoyak or others, then I'd be happy to just walk it through. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Please do.
Okay, so host disabled. Sure. I think I need permission from Devin.
All set now.
Okay, thanks. Okay, can y'all see this?
Now we can. Yep.
Okay. Oh, sorry. This is the question that precedes the question in question, and so this is the sort of the typical what a lot of the questions look like from the perspective of the user. You could click like one of these circles for each of these things. When we got to the question that is in question, which is this one, here's what it looked like. Okay, so the question says, in given situations, it's possible to have either police or social service workers, such as social workers, etc., respond. For each of the following situations, please indicate whether you think it would be better for the police or social service workers to respond. So here, instead of like those circles, it's these check boxes. So you could collect, check this one or this one. If you check not sure, the other two disappear, you see? And so for some of them, people chose both or just one. For the one, I think that was the domestic violence one, a plurality of people chose both. But for other ones, it was primarily just one or the other. Okay, so that's how the question looked to the perspective of the user. I think I described that. I just reviewed the report that I filed here. I think I conveyed that exactly as it showed up. The conflict, I think, was in this presentation. So what's in here in this prompt is exactly the prompt that the respondent saw. And so, if you put just police, sorry, just to toggle back and forth here for this one.
No, Eitan, we're not seeing the toggle, so we're only seeing the survey still.
Oh, how do I?
That I know.
You can't see toggling?
No, we just see the survey.
Okay, in any case, fine.
All right, go ahead.
Do y'all know how to toggle? Okay, forget it. I'll just
you can, at the top of your screen, there should be something that says show some, give you the ability to show something else, to change what you're showing.
Okay, sorry, I think I can do it just from here. That's fine.
All right.
So what was it? So in the slide presentation, it contained this prompt that the respondent saw. And then for each of these items, like neighborly disputes, it showed police, social service workers, or both. Now, I didn't translate not sure into both. I excluded not sure. And so if people checked both, then that was the percentage that checked both. There's two ways one could interpret Mr. von Skoyak's critique. One is he might have assumed that I was counting not sure as both, which is not what I did. It's if you checked both that I counted you as both. I think another interpretation of his critique was that it doesn't say here in the prompt that one could check both. So respondents needed to intuit that they could check both. I think they could intuit that because of the user interface. This kind of check mark system is much different than most of the survey, the single response, which looked like this. And we also know that a large percentage of respondents checked both at least once. Now, obviously, this is not a survey that we crafted ourselves. So if we were to do it all again, should this prompt have said for each of the following situations, please indicate whether you think it would be better for the police or social worker respondent or both? Sure, I would be happy to do that. I mentioned this to Mr. von Skoyak, which is that I think if we did the survey and it said both, I would bet a lot of money we'd get the same results because I think that respondents intuited that. But nevertheless, this is the data that exists as we have. It's not clear to me whether this particular question wording debate is significantly affecting the judgment of select board members. If it was, I mean, I think we could go back to the field and survey people again. But again, I think that's the nature of the critique here, that it didn't say or both, even though it gave the opportunity for respondents to check both.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful, Eitan. Thanks for that. I think one of the other things that was implicit in that the presentation on Tuesday night was that everything rests on this one question in the survey. And as I know, Ann Weaver responded, and others know, is that one byte of data that we believe supports in everything else that we're doing, of course, but that's not the only way that we collected data. It sort of ignores, I think, the work of the subcommittees and all the interviews that took place and all the research that took place. And and you name it. So in any
That's
case, I'm glad.
I'll just
okay.
say, I think it makes sense to emphasize again that we had a choice as a committee to go through with this survey, knowing that we didn't have control over every individual question wording item, and that if we did have that control, it would have taken a long time to hash out every nitpick. And so this is the data that we have. I think it's overall quite good. Yeah, I would think it would be such a shame for the select board to discount respondents, 1,300 something respondents, just because of a question that didn't say or both, when respondents clearly mostly intuited it.
Yeah. And I will say, if folks have questions about our data, one need not wait for a select board meeting or another meeting to ask us. Eitan's been amazingly available to answer questions from any member of the public that's had questions about that survey in particular. So so please do reach out to us. Any folks watching this meeting, if you have more questions about it, please reach out to us, and we'll make sure you get an answer. Other sort of now thoughts about Tuesday night, and again, you know, my eye is toward the future. My eye is not sort of thinking backwards, but you know, trying to think about how we can help members of the public and even the board and other bodies gain greater understanding of our work. Amas?
So one of the things that I heard, and I'm sorry, I don't remember who said it, but it was like, oh, well, we already have police workers going out with social workers, which is like, we have one social worker, right? Like, so, and I'm sorry, I forget who it said, and I wish I had spoken up, but I didn't. But I think maybe somehow making that clearer, like, no, we have Annabelle Lane, and she is funded by the DMH, and she doesn't go out with every, you know, it's like when we did the interview, that's not what I heard. It's not like she goes out, but it's like she'll do a follow-up if they see something. But again, Anne and Alexander, like, I don't know if you heard the same things I did, and if you want to, we should say something like more explicitly then in our report or something about that.
Right. Yeah, I'm really worried about misinformation throughout this process, because there was a comment made that social workers go out on it was almost every call or all of the calls that police go on, which is just, I mean, not even it's not even in the ballpark, the neighborhood or of true. And so I'm really concerned about misinformation like that, and any conclusions that are grounded in misinformation. But that's something that is widely known not to be true. Anyway, so we've got to make sure. The problem is, you end up in meetings like this trying to like squash every bug, right? Like like having to respond to every bit of misinformation, and it ends up, I think, derailing the larger conversation that needs to be had about the recommendations that are there. But if you don't do that, then there are people that are just tuning in that believe it to be true, and that's unfortunate. Yeah, Malcolm.
Yeah, I think similarly, I am particularly worried, and I'll just use one of the committees I'm on in terms of the school resource officer. I felt like there was sort of a one-sided story that makes it easy to say, let's just stay the normal. In other words, you know, there are some people who will say the school resource officer has done a really good job. And it's not so much me denying that, but like you said, there's not a lot of metrics for that. There's not a lot of open evaluation for that. And some of it is rooted in what I think this task force stands for. So the argument that I need to know kids and build relationships to do diversionary stuff for teenagers is a really problematic argument, because we should be doing that for teenagers anyway. I should not have to know you. I should not have to have actual physical contact and knowledge of you to realize that teenagers do dumb stuff sometimes, and that we should be practicing diversionary practices with them. And so I actually don't know if when this happens, I'll be able to say something like that. That, in other words, doing what's right doesn't mean putting a police officer in a school permanently with an office in candy. Like that's, if the real idea is that we should be having diversionary things with teenagers, that does not actually require someone to be in schools and to build relationships. It doesn't actually require that. And so I think like all of that is in the report, right? And so what I at least, and again, I want to be upfront, I have not read the reform. I'm hoping to read it this weekend. It's just, it's been a crazy start to 2021 with all these things, but like, to say to affirm what they have done is to me what you're supposed to do. And to quote John Cawthorn, my dad who taught for I don't know how many years, he used to say to me, Malcolm, you don't get rewards for doing what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do your homework. You're supposed to clean your room. Like you don't get paid for good grades because you're supposed to get good grades. And so now the police want a reward to like honor what they're saying is really good work. And it's not so much that I'm challenging the good work as much as I don't see why that leads to what they're saying is the end result, when that should be our end result anyway. Our end result should always be to do diversionary things with teenagers. And so like, people are talking about like, I'm sort of toggling two hats, talk about toggling, because there's a school side of this for me. And they were talking about how some kids broke into the like construction site at Brookline High School. And it was really dangerous. And they could be, fined for trespassing and all these other things, but they did diversionary tactics. Well, you're supposed to do that. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're supposed to do. And so I understand that police don't have to do that. But to me, this fits into a narrative, right? That when we know who is actually supposed to be in Brookline, you get a break. But when you're that motorist that drives through and you're not from Brookline, you don't. Especially if you don't look like you're supposed to be in Brookline. Because that's what all that data points to, right? That we stop the majority of people who don't actually live in Brookline. When we know we could stop just as many people from Brookline, and we don't. And that's not really building relationships. And so I don't know how, and not so much I don't know how, I worry we won't have the chance to argue that. I worry we won't have the chance to say, this is what's happening, and we know it's happening. That as long as you reside here, you get this benefit of the doubt. And when you don't, we have to have these inroads with teenagers so that we can give them the benefit of the doubt. When we know that's what we're supposed to do with teenagers anyway. And so I worry because I think, Kendi, you had this quote, return to normalcy is a return, and I'm paraphrasing, so please, I'll probably screw at the end, to systemic oppression, because that was already there. It was there before COVID, it was there, and I worry that the easier road is to say, well, let's just get back to what it used to be. And not actually contemplating, again, for the SRO, like why all of a sudden we need somebody in Brookline High School after 175 years. Why do we actually need that? And make the argument for why we need that now. And I do. I worry, they're going to take our recommendations, which they were pretty open about saying, and flush those out, but actually have no metrics to do it. Right? Like what will actually bound them to presenting to school committee? What will actually bound them to having public hearings? The reality is they still haven't had them. Brookline High School has tried to have them and, not always doing a great job, but, what would actually bound them to that? And so I worry about the ability to make that argument and actually make it where select board members, I mean, you mentioned, Heather Hamilton and Nancy Heller. I agree with you. They have not been able to be present, at least at our meetings. How do we make that argument beyond the report?
Well, Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, I think, if you know, there may also be an opportunity to sort of get on the docket of the school committee and us sort of have a focus presentation just on the SRO role and anything else the school committee would like to hear about. Obviously, I don't know if they want another hour presentation from us, but to maybe a longer presentation than we were able to give to the select board on this particular role with the school committee. So that's something that I can check in with Suzanne Fetterspiel, the school committee chair, about. I know they've got lots of other things going on, but this is a really important issue, of course. Add to that the recent state legislation, as we all know, removed the requirement for SROs altogether. And there was never a requirement for SROs to be inside schools, but they removed the requirement altogether that there even be one. And Worcester this week just voted to remove officers from schools. They actually are eliminating that role, along with doing a few other things that they're working on right now. Thank you, Malcolm. Anne?
Yeah, similarly to what Malcolm just said, but in relation to social workers and the police force, yes, it's absolutely true that Annabelle Lane, the one social worker in the BPD, goes out on calls rarely. I mean, once in a while, but not on a consistent basis. But more to the point, instead of adding more social workers to the police force, that's sort of negating what we're saying in terms of the vulnerable people in crisis report, that what we see as needed, we're seeing as needed alternative community resources instead of the police, to be supporting and providing services to people in the community, not adding to the police force in terms of adding more social workers would be in direct contrast to what we're recommending. And what we're recommending is based on, research. It's based on the stakeholder interviews that we had within the community and outside of the community. It's just concluding that what we need to do in terms of community work for vulnerable people is to add more social workers in the BPD is the opposite of what we're recommending, what we're saying our community needs. So I'm just concerned about that argument. Like Malcolm said, instead of keeping with the norm and adding to it, is just another way of perpetuating the problems that we're having in the community, as opposed to thinking about how could we do this better.
Thanks, Anne. It's about, also what again, in the context of limited resources also, but what is the most appropriate position to address these issues that we're talking about here? And I think Anthony Meyer in particular, the head of Brookline High School, I'd encourage, I'd love to engage with him a little bit more about this, and because that position right now is funded through the town side of the budget, not through the school side of the budget. And I would encourage you to sort of ask Anthony Meyer, if that money was on the town side of the budget, would he spend that money on an officer, or would he spend it on something else? I'm sorry, on the school side of the budget, on their budget. Would they spend that on an officer, or would they spend that on a social worker in the school? And I've heard him talk about this. I know his response, but I won't speak for him. But I would love to have him involved and engaged in a conversation with us and the school committee about that. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Bonnie.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm, for so clearly and perfectly putting my same anxiety out there, as you described it, that it's so scary to put all this work out and all the nuance that's required to think about it out of our hands. You know, we are losing advocacy abilities a little bit here. And when we talk about compromise for the SRO or the walk and talk program, the middle of the road is exactly the same. You know, the middle of the road is just leaving it there exactly as it is. And I think, I don't know what my point is. I just want to build on Malcolm Cawthorn and say I share this anxiety enormously. That, thinking about the questions that came up from folks that haven't been following this work, says that there's a big gap in understanding of what we've been thinking about and the fine points that we're using to make our recommendations. Where like the walk and talk program, where we're asking people to make a leap from using minority majority argument to believing people, to believing that their feelings are real and valid. And that I feel like not being able to be in the room while they're reading the report, or just hoping that the report gets read in depth, it's just giving me great anxiety. So that's not a question. It's just like,
I hear you.
It's yeah.
Yeah. Chi-Chi?
Yeah, I hear you too, Bonnie. This is something I was thinking about, and I think a lot of us were thinking about a meeting or two ago when we were talking about the executive summary, that the reality is a lot of people aren't going to read the report. They're just going to, either read the executive summary or attend a public hearing and, hear whatever exchange goes on there. And I don't know how to combat that either. I mean, that BFAC report, Mel, talked about earlier, I'm like a quarter of the way through reading it because it's long. And I worry people had the same reaction. I had a question about this whole issue. I mean, I agree, Malcolm, your comments were just so profound and moving. And I wish lots of people could hear them. We do have a public hearing on March 17th. Are we going through these presentations again, or is it just an opportunity for the public to give comment? Because, I mean, I know I feel bad. You guys saw the comment in the chat. I took a fair amount of time going through the traffic statistics, and everybody else seemed to be much briefer. And I think all the subcommittees deserved the opportunity to dig deep into their research and findings to be able to make that showing to counter the initial reaction. Oh, well, why would you do that? Why would you get rid of the SROs?
So no, we won't have an opportunity to make another presentation. March 16th, by the way, for folks that are watching, Tuesday, March 16th. But we will be there and on hand to answer questions. I think we've got to figure out. I'll talk with Bernard about this, but I don't know how many people are going to show up. If it's when you have public hearings, when there are fewer people, you have more opportunity for some back and forth and dialogue with members of the public. When you have a public hearing where the room is essentially full, then you need to prioritize making sure that every person that took the time to show up has an opportunity to share whatever's on their mind and also ask whatever questions they have. And then we've got to figure out how we can get people answers to the questions that they have. So I don't know yet what the answer to that is, but I will talk with Bernard and try to figure out a path forward here. Yeah, Mike, you have a thought?
Yeah, I think I was listening to Bonnie's comment about being anxious that, okay, we put this report together and now we're anxious that it inevitably goes out of our hands. We're not the select board or a town meeting, and what comes out of this is a set of recommendations that someone else has to act on. And in my mind, the best way to make sure that that happens is to have some ongoing ongoing committee that, as much as I grumbled about the 5 o'clock in the morning, no, sorry, 8 o'clock in the morning, Friday morning meetings, we have to have some kind of ongoing committee set up that provides a little push and attempts to guide the process forward. Otherwise, it will be so completely out of our hands that we won't recognize what comes out of it at the far end.
Right. You know, and I do agree that well, at least some of what I thought was implicit in Bonnie's comments, and tell me if you were saying something different, but I do agree that there are some areas where there's a clear choice to be made, either this or that, go in this direction or that direction, and not everything that that we're recommending and they're recommending can necessarily be reconciled. And so that's why we have policymakers that are and that's why we have members of the public that can advocate for the position they'd like those policymakers to take. Yeah, Mike.
The walk and talk and SRO programs are perfect examples of, it's a binary. The choice is binary. There really isn't much of a middle ground on this.
But I'm sorry, can I make just a quick direct
Yeah,
response?
please. Yeah.
But is it? Like, can they just choose to compromise?
Where is there a compromise?
I see it. They can just choose to leave it as is, which would be the compromise, right?
Oh, that's not a compromise. That's not
Right.
taking our recommendation.
Right. So they can do that though.
Oh, sure. Oh, that's why I say where it's out of our, but that's why we need to have some mechanism to keep poking.
I know. I'm just clarifying that it isn't actually, choice A or B. It's choice A or B or no change.
Well, no change is choice A.
Right. I think you're saying the same thing. Yeah. Alexander?
Sorry, my brain's a little bit scrambled this morning. I want to, first of all, agree with and uplift everything Malcolm said. I want to quickly note there's a pattern every time we've discussed the issues that we're dealing with in this task force before select board that I've been there, same back in July, we're the very last people on the agenda. If there's any way that we can move the discussion of these two task forces to the beginning of the agenda, I think would make an enormous difference. It is not acceptable for us to be consistently relegated to 10 p.m. when people need to be getting to bed. We're losing public engagement with, frankly, one of the pieces on the agenda that has the most public engagement and the most draw for why people are coming to this select board meeting in the first place. I'd like to talk about how we can change that. And to sort of add on to your worry, Bonnie, and to bring up something that you said earlier, Raul, we don't know which way the wind is blowing for two members of the select board. We didn't hear their thoughts on Tuesday night. We haven't heard their thoughts in past meetings over the last several months. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that in order for us to get any movement at all, we're going to need 3 out of 5 votes. And so here's, I guess, what I'm wondering is, are we going to receive any votes on anything that doesn't overlap with the reform task force? I personally have a strong impression that at least 2 members of the select board are disinclined to vote for anything that we say. So I think it's really important that we get some kind of sense of what the other 2 members of the select board are interested in so that we can start having a conversation. I'm not at the point where I'm prepared to start making any kind of compromise of any kind until I'm aware of what people in the people on the select board actually want to see. And I don't think that we heard that in a really substantive way on Tuesday night, and maybe that will change as time goes on, but I don't think we're there yet.
Fair enough. Thank you. So for Mel, one of the agenda setters, and Devin, who I know sits in on those meetings, I would say consider that a request from the task force to see if we can get the public hearing moved up earlier. I mean, it's not set yet. The agenda is not set yet, but have that take place, as early as possible in the agenda when we have the most opportunity for public engagement. Does that make sense?
Well, I just want to clarify, I'm not an agenda setter. The chair of the board sets the agenda. So I work with him, and try to work with that. So I'm hearing you loud and clear. There are many times when the board will set a special meeting just to talk about this if it's important enough. And I would encourage Raul to convey that to your colleague if that's something you think you want to do. But I will definitely. I was concerned that things got on so late and went on so long and deferred the. So you can plan these things, you can put them on, but things happen at these meetings. So sometimes the way to inoculate yourself against all that is just to have a separate meeting, maybe at a different time. The Zoom accommodates a lot of that flexibility these days. So.
All right, I'll talk to Bernard about that. I think we're looking at a potentially 2+ hour public comment session, and when we look at nearby communities that have had conversations about similar issues, some of those public hearing sessions go late into the night, and so. Yeah, I don't know how many folks are going to show up and what they're going to have to say, but these things can go pretty late, and so the earlier we can start, the better. All right, I'll talk with Bernard about that. Other thoughts? Alexander, yeah.
Just to quickly say, I think Mel's idea of, and I don't know how the scheduling would work out here, but Mel's idea of a separate meeting to discuss sounds really good to me. That specifically what I would envision that for is not just for the public comment, which I think the public hearing, has the date on that has been set for quite a long time, but a meeting specifically for the select board members to talk about how they're feeling in response to our presentation, the hearing, the public hearing prior to the vote, to give them some more time to chat about this in a public forum.
So you mean between the public hearing and March 30th?
March 30th is the vote, yeah?
Yeah, well, as Mel explained, probably the first of numerous votes, but yeah.
Yes. And
Okay.
I recognize, we're on a tight timeline and everybody's schedules are rough, but I'm not sure that I see a way for there to, frankly, I think the select board's vote on this lacks at least a little bit of legitimacy if they haven't had a meaningful opportunity for discussion, which I don't see that they will have. If we had our presentation, a couple minutes of questions, the public hearing, and then the vote, when's the time for debate? When's the time for discussion of, I have this concern, would we be willing to move? If it's just the day of the vote, that's not a ton of time.
Right. Good point. Okay. Bernard and I are gonna have to set aside a couple of hours. We got a lot to talk about. Other thoughts, concerns?
I mean, I would just reiterate that I don't know if I disagree with Alexander exactly, but I really think given the nature of your voting process, the more that can happen, the behind the scenes, the better. The more that you and Bernard can agree upon without a full debate, the better. I just don't think open processes are general, with long drawn out debates are, especially on Zoom, are necessarily conducive to reaching a 3-person majority on something like this. So I don't think that it's necessarily at odds with what Alexander's saying, but I just think for this particular thing, I just, quiet consensus might be the best option in my opinion.
I don't at all disagree with that.
Yeah, I think just speaking as a board member now, there are things that I see that and maybe this is not the most politician-y way to do things or to get what it is that you want, But I look at a proposal on the merits of the proposal, not who brought it forward, or whether or not I like that person, or whether or not I'm trying to extract something else from that person. I look at it on the merits. Is this going to make us better or not? And that's how I'm going to look at the proposals that are coming from the reform group, and any other proposals that come our way. I don't, you know, you're not going to see me doing a whole lot of horse trading or anything like that. I'll vote for this thing you like if you vote for this thing it's just not how I do things. It's not what I'm here to do. And you know, the only thing that I can ask for is for other board members to be just as fair with the proposals that we have coming forward. Bonnie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that consensus behind the scenes is a good idea, but knowing what we know about the differences between the two committee chairs, I can't see there's a whole lot of coming together between the two proposals. And so maybe both, you know, there, you know, still needs to happen. You know, I don't know that how do you have one proposal of walk and talk and the other proposal? I don't know. I feel both, and you know, we need
Right.
as much ability for contact to advocate and explain and do as much as possible, from my perspective, at least.
Mm-hmm. Let me get Alexander and then Mike.
I agree with that, and I just want to say, Raul, we're so immensely lucky to have you in local politics. I had another thought, but it'll come back to me. Sorry.
All right, we'll stay tuned. Mike?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to go after walk and talk or SROs first, because there is such a difference between the two reports. The sensible thing to do is to look at the places where there's something significant, where there's a pretty good overlap. The best example of that, I think, is in the Civilian Review Committee. And once you do that, a couple of things happen. One is you get used to working cooperatively on a difficult set of issues. And the second is you build some trust. I think it's difficult to look at the Reform Committee's report and hear their critique of the report that we have and feel like that somebody who's criticizing it has goodwill. But I would much prefer to believe that they do. And I would certainly hope that they believe that we have goodwill. And as I said in the comments that I made, there were a lot of people who said to me, you know, the people on that task force are all headed in one direction, they've made up their minds. And that wasn't my experience. And so I think if we can work, if Raul and his 4 colleagues on the select board work together, perhaps with the help of a couple of a little bit of outside help to work on the areas of common interest, a common agreement, then you can tackle the tough ones, and then you might be surprised at what you get on the issues where we diverge.
Well, you know, I think too, the big proposal for me, and these are all interconnected, of course, but this shift to a social service model is sort of exemplified in the Brookline Forward proposal, but I think has larger impacts even than that what we've laid out there. This in terms of reorienting our approach to social services more broadly as a community. That in particular is something I want to dig in more with the board, because we found a way to do that in some ways utilizes existing services while enhancing those services. And the price tag we've gone on it right now is just upwards of $500,000. Remember last year, in a very sort of very contentious time, and those contentious times will come again, by the way. And so I think hanging over all of this is the fact that folks said in the community, okay, we'll give you an opportunity. We'll give you 6 months to see if you can do the things that we're asking you to do, which is not to add a tremendous amount to the police budget and expand the scope of police, but instead to reinvest funds that are going toward policing into social services. That is exactly what people were asking to do. So if we as a community, after this process and two groups working on this stuff, ended up in a place where we don't do any of that, that is something that is not going to be well supported. And you can imagine we're going to be right back to where we were. And the point of creating these bodies is to be responsive to those folks who thought we needed to do something much different than we're doing right now. And so I think that can't get lost in this, is that folks, the work that we've done was set out by people in the community that demanded it, but also a select board that unanimously voted for the members of this task force to do this work. And here we have this product, which I think is a very good product. And it doesn't require anyone to have to vote, to cast a vote that says they don't like police. It doesn't require that at all. It requires someone to be able to step back and say, all right, we've got this many, positions. We've got this much in resources. How can we better utilize these resources in a way that better addresses these issues? I think that's the message that we have to keep sort of bringing across. But I think that there is, or at least there should be, some tremendous pressure on my colleagues to meet this challenge, because it's essentially why we're here in the first place. And we're in a bit of a détente right now, right? We're in a bit of a place where folks said, okay, let me give you some time to work, with the notion that people are very skeptical because they've seen committees like this get created before, and reports end up just collecting dust, and decisions don't get made, and changes don't happen. And you know where we're going to be? Right here again. And probably not that long from now. And when I say right here, I mean, think back to June. That's where we're going to be again, not too long from now, if we don't do something meaningful at the end of this process. And I think that's something that I certainly want to reiterate to the board when we take this up, whenever we do have that discussion that Alexander's talking about. I think that's something that I need to reiterate to the board. Alexander, did you figure out what it was?
I did.
Yeah.
The other piece for me is, I think we've seen really strong public support every time we've had public hearings. I think the subcommittees saw it. I think we've seen it as a task force. I think we saw it in the select board conversations in June and July. And we certainly saw it at town meeting last spring. So we need to really focus on getting people to come to the public hearing. But in addition to that, which I think that needs to be a conversation of this task force, of like, how are we doing this type of outreach? And to make a bit of a joke, if the police can do it, so can we. Let's get the information out there about the hearing. I think it's really important to remind the select board of that. Along the lines of what you were saying, Raul, like, this is where the public winds are blowing, and this is what the public has consistently demanded. And if this turns out to be an opportunity just for you to kind of push people off and wait, so that there isn't quite such a fever pitch of public attention, it's going to be real obvious, and it's going to happen immediately.
The other thing that I'll say too is the last year in the budget, the board sort of proposed a change, is the best that was going to happen at the time, I think, in advance of some of the budget amendments that came to town meeting. And ultimately $166,000 was shifted from police for the overtime budget. And part of those monies created the community engagement specialist position, and some other monies went into more social services side. What we're talking about with this grand proposal is just something on the order of just about 3 times that. The financial ask here is not great, and the task force has a plan for where it should come from, which is I think different than frankly the proposals I'm seeing from the Reform Committee. And by the way, I am not opposed to all the proposals from the Reform Committee. There are things I like in there, but I don't see a plan to pay for any of it. And that is absolutely critical, and that should be concerning to all the folks that created that BFAC report we keep talking about today, and others. Is where's the money coming from for that? And so I just like when we sort of think, it's easy, I think, for folks to sort of take a look at our proposal and say this is radical. And when you actually stop to think about it, it's really a reallocation of resources, frankly, and a modest sort of request at that. So again, I think we'll have an opportunity to greater make this case to the board, but I do want to talk more, as Alexander mentioned, about not just the public hearing itself, but how we reach out to the public throughout this month of March. But let me get Malcolm in here first.
Yeah, thanks. And you kind of hit on some of it. I mean, I was really kind of interested in waiting for a number figure from the Reform Committee when they talked about their additions. But more importantly, there was something I wish, and maybe this is just in my frontal lobe because as a teacher, we're negotiating these things. But, you know, when they talked about increase of pay for police officers, when police officers are, you know, the 7 highest paid people in our town are police officers. And so, and I can understand that that's not their salary. That's combined with overtime, right? And so I can grasp that, but I also don't have a basis of comparison when they say it's not competitive. I mean, I know as a teacher, I'm not going to make as much money in Brookline as I do in Boston or even in Cambridge. Those are larger cities. They have different unions. They get paid differently. That's a concession, right? And I'm curious to see if that's the same concession in being a police officer in Brookline. I don't actually know, but they didn't actually provide it either. And I think my big concern, particularly as a resident, as a teacher who, you know, Brookline High School was told at the beginning of negotiations, we're going to have to cut 10 FTE. Now, I don't think that's really true. I think usually what happens in negotiations, they tell you this really astronomical number so that you're happy when they cut it back to 3 people. But I was so blown away by that. Like, I mean, I don't know, especially when you look at those statistics and who's being paid the most in town to actually ask for more money was frankly bizarre to me, with no basis of comparison, just to say they deserve it. I mean, I could argue I deserve more money.
I can argue I deserve more money.
I could argue that. And like, I need a basis of comparison to argue that. You know what I mean? Like, I can't just say I deserve more money. Again, going back, you know, you don't get rewards for what you're supposed to do, right? And so I would like to see some of that from the reform. Like when you talk about what is that cost, and what does that actually take away from the rest of the town, particularly when we're talking about cutting teachers and staff and social workers for children, because those are the ones who are going to go first. All the support staff and all the enriching staff that make Brookline schools so great. It's going to be music. Last year when the cuts happened, they cut the entire career and tech department before they brought them back. And so, you know, again, to ask for that is actually, you know, bizarre to me. I think the last thing I want to say, and this is more of a reflection from the last public hearing, I think we need some protocols and understanding about what it means to be in a public hearing. Because what I distinctly remember was task force members signing up and speaking as opposed to listening. And I think I just want to be really clear before we start, because I can sign up and pitch our thing really well too. And to me, it was actually very lopsided in terms of that. And so I think we need to make sure we have those protocols as we start, that, you know, as task force members, are we supposed to speak? I get one thing, like, you know, if someone were to ask a direct question of our task force into like a subcommittee, that maybe we're expected to respond to that. But that isn't what happened in the last public hearing.
Right.
People actually got on and went on. One person talked for well past 3 minutes. And so I think we need to make sure that is established and clear and followed. And if Bernard can't follow it, I'll chair the meeting and make sure everybody follows it. Because one of the beautiful things about Zoom is you can just mute somebody. You don't have to sit there and be polite. Whoever the host can just mute them. And so I think that has to be understood and clearly held to accountability for the adults. If we can do this with 15 and 16-year-olds, we can do this with grown people with thousands of dollars of education. And so I think that has to be very clearly stated and put forward.
I'll make sure we have a conversation about the ground rules that includes that. Thank you. Anything else here?
You know, just going back to the issue of the budgetary considerations, one of the things, so I sat in on the, I'm forgetting the proper term, Mike will correct me, whatever advisory committee, subcommittee that was looking at the police department's budget. And there are 7 vacancies right now, and apparently a lot of retirements forthcoming. 7 FTEs would more than cover what we're proposing, I think. Just saying.
Yeah. So FTEs for folks out there, that is full-time equivalent.
Yes, sorry.
For a full-time position. Yeah, make sure.
And just to give you a frame of dollars and cents, an FTE fully, on average, fully loading benefits on it costs about $100,000 a year. So that's more or less $700,000. That's not the salary that somebody receives. The actually starting salary for a police officer is something like $54,000, $55,000. But the total cost on average is about $100,000.
Starting salary for police officers is, sorry about the dog, is about mid 60s.
Mid 60s, not mid 50s.
Yeah, we were told that, or I heard at that
Okay,
committee meeting, it was
all
mid
right.
50s, mid 60s.
Yeah, that was, I think John Van Scar's comment was mid 50s.
Sorry, you're right. The starting is lower than that, but the step 4, where many of the folks who are retiring or have left are at that top step.
Oh, yeah, we're at the top of the heap. Yeah.
All right, folks. Looking forward, unless I don't know that there's a lot to do if we were to meet next week. Do folks feel strongly that we should meet next Friday, or is that an opportunity to take a break? I don't know that there's a lot we can do at this point to prepare for that. Alexander, the thumbs up was on what? I feel like I was offering different options, and I don't know what you're thumbs upping.
I'm sorry. I think at least in part, particularly if select board members want to be asking us questions during the voting process, which, you know, I'm wondering if I should be retracting my thoughts about having an additional meeting, because I'm reflecting back on the voting process to have this task force, which was a series of meetings with many debates. So maybe I'm just wrong here, but I'm wondering if maybe the task force members will have questions for us on the basis of what comes out in the public hearings. And if in that case, it would be useful for us to still meet next week after the public hearing.
Right. So next week won't be after the public hearing. The week after, yes, I do want us to meet.
Sorry.
Yeah. Am I correct about that? Am I losing my mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, next week, the public hearing isn't until 2 Tuesdays from now. Right. So we would take the 12th off, and then we would meet again on the 19th for sure. I'd want to meet to discuss the public hearing and And then I think we would continue meeting for the rest of the month just to prepare anything else to be, if we need to come to consensus on things that we as a task force want to support that we're seeing, rise as proposals, or say, no, we as a task force think that that's a really bad idea. I want to make sure that we have that opportunity after the public hearing to do that. So unless anyone feels very strongly about meeting next week, I think we can take next Friday off. And, what I would encourage members to do is to make yourself available to various constituencies, particularly over the next week or so, folks that are in faith communities, to talk to them about our work, folks that are in cultural communities, to talk to them about our work, folks, wherever you are and whatever communities you're a part of, the school community and others, the public housing community, to really start to share. And what I would encourage you to share is this, share the video of our presentation at the select board. That's on big right now. And you can make it, if you don't, on YouTube, you can make it so it starts right when our presentation starts. So they don't have to watch 5-hour meeting. They can just watch the presentation and if they like the conversation afterwards. Share the report. One of the things I want to see, and Devin, if I can work with you to see if we can actually just create a separate link to the executive summary. And then on that executive summary, say, here's how you can find the full report, and then link to the full report too. That way, when someone opens it up, they don't see, I don't even know how many pages our document is, but nearly 200-page document. Instead, they see a 10-page report. Devin, is that something we can work on together?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And so that's what I would recommend, saying, here's you can watch our presentation, take a look at the executive summary. And, I'd be happy to talk more with whomever is interested in learning more about our work. And if there are people that are very interested in learning more about our work on, let's say, the SRO or the walk and talk or whatever it is, then bringing in task force members from that subcommittee to speak with those groups, as needed, or just one person to do that. I think the more that we can engage with the public through, even before the public hearing, the better. And we should engage with those that are already in our circles, those that are closest to us. We've had 7 opportunities now for public comment. We've got another one coming up, on the 16th. But going back to this going small approach, which I think is the right way to go. I'd encourage sort of more micro conversations along the way too. I think it was Chi and then Bonnie.
I completely agree. We can skip next week's meeting.
Okay.
Just want to make sure we get some outreach materials so that we can let folks know about the public hearing. Maybe just an email, if someone could compose an email with the relevant information about registering, maybe with that YouTube link that you mentioned and a link to the report, that would be fantastic.
Great. To report, register. Okay. Great. Bonnie?
I would be happy to help with that. Is it, and maybe it's the same as a Go Small thing, but I know there are small groups of people that I would love to get in front of with some other people in the group to talk about what we've done and to answer any questions. Are there legal issues with that?
In terms of you having conversation with a group?
Well, not just me, but maybe someone from the SRO or another, like, it's still if we just don't have a quorum.
Right.
Okay.
As long as you don't have a quorum, you're okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Because I think if we can do that as much as possible, if there's any group that we can contact that we could get in front of and have a conversation about what we did here, the more movement can be built behind us.
I will say here's one group that keeps coming up that I know Bernard mentioned even in his presentation, is not hearing enough from, young people. And so the more young people we can, we can engage and have share their views at the public hearing on the 16th, I think the better. I agree with them on that. I think those voices, we've certainly heard them more offline, right? But having those voices present in spaces where they normally aren't, i.e. public hearings and select board meetings, I think will be really helpful. Okay. All right, folks. So we will not meet next Friday. So you won't get, we'll make sure that's not on your calendar or anything like that, and you won't get any link for that. We will meet the subsequent Fridays afterwards. So do plan on that. The only other thing I'll say, while it's easy to say while everyone's here, is that my partner and I have a baby this month. I don't know when that's going to be. But it's going to happen this month, I'm pretty sure. And so at some point, just know that we may need to be a little bit flexible. I'll let you know, it's not the kind of thing you get a whole bunch of advance notice about. But as soon as I know that might make me unavailable for something, I will let you know that I'm not available for that thing. So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there just so we could be aware that we may need to be a little bit flexible and things might need to change. The plan might need to change if and when that happens.
I think we can give you that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I think that's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Alexander?
Raul, if you can let us know in a private email where we should be sending takeout and flowers, hope you'll do that.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I will let you know. Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your work on this. Thanks again to the staff for your tremendous support and insights. It's always been really helpful. And let's keep the energy going. Let's keep making the case and talking to everybody who's interested in learning more about our work. All right. See y'all soon. Take care. Thanks, y'all.